What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. I wanted to do a follow-up to my video from last week about collecting fatigue. It seems like I struck a nerve with a number of you guys and girls, and I appreciate all of the feedback, all the commentary, what you guys are experiencing with regard to collecting fatigue. And I wanted to dig into some of y'all's comments. And before I dig in any further, my Patreon supporters and all my channel subscribers, thank you. You guys allow me to make more and better videos, and I really appreciate all the feedback from this topic. And it sounds like everyone is going through this to a certain extent. I got a ton of feedback, and I picked a select bunch of comments that I thought were either funny or nailed it for me, or just in general where it was an interesting thought. And if I didn't share your comment, it's not because I didn't think it was a good comment, okay? It's because I'm trying to keep this video to a reasonable time length. And on that note, I'd love to hear some additional thoughts on this topic. If we want to keep the gravy train rolling with regard to this commentary and collecting fatigue, or the opposite of that, collecting frenzy, so to speak. If you guys are not experiencing collecting fatigue, I just would love to hear more comments. So feel free to share in this video what your thoughts are related to Star Wars collecting, the state of the union, so to speak. Where do you think the market is right now? Where do you think it's going? And how do you think that your collection fits in with that? And what your plans are for the rest of the year? I know for me that I'm definitely taking a little bit of a hiatus as it relates to action figures. I'm just not buying nearly as many or as high a price as I have in the past. And I'm sure I'll get out of that mindset, but at least right now I've bought one item of anything, Star Wars or anything related, in the last, let's see, today's the March 21st when I'm recording this. In the last almost 6 weeks now, I've bought one item. So that tells you, and it was $167 was the price after shipping. So it was a Punisher War Journal number 6, which is the first meeting of the Punisher with Wolverine. It's a CGC 9.8. That's the only item I've bought in the last almost 6 weeks now. Tomorrow will be exactly 6 weeks. And so that shows you, for me, that I've really taken a break. That's a pretty long time for me to only buy one item. And I'll also say this, it's not because of a lack of funds. I've sold a number of items here, both on eBay as well as, in the Facebook groups, Rogue 5 Toys. I've sold a number of vintage collection items there. And, let's go ahead and dig right in. I think I've talked about me enough, but, as we're kind of going through this, if these comments trigger some thoughts from you, share them in this video. I'd love to hear it. But I picked out a number of different items. Mark Banks says, I'm a starving artist and I get wallet fatigue. That's, collecting fatigue and wallet fatigue to me go hand in hand. And that's what I talked about. He said he's getting wallet fatigue from stuff like buying groceries every week. And you can add gasoline on that now. I mean, we've seen what gas prices have done and what, inflation has done in my last video on Sunday on stagflation and the risks of a U.S. recession or global recession, really. And he says, but that doesn't stop me from buying whatever vintage I can. And so that's interesting. And he says, I saw a meme once that says, what happens in my calculator is between me and God. And that's a really funny comment, because to a certain extent, that's what we all do, right? We all try to justify the purchases, whether it's with ourselves or with our significant others. I know I've gone to my wife and said, it was a great deal. I had to buy this. I got it for such a great deal. Well, it's all justification, right? We don't really need this stuff. This is all stuff that's first world problems. There's a lot of people that can't afford to collect, that maybe would like to, but they're just they're having a hard time making ends meet with regard to how expensive stuff is and how expensive rent is, or food and gas. So, these are all very clearly first world problems. Let's make no mistake about that. David S., who's a Patreon supporter, thank you, David, for all your channel support. He said, this is a great series. I'm not sure if I have quote unquote fatigue. I'm running out of things to collect that I really want. And that's the key there, that I really want. And I think not enough collectors, and myself included, I freely admit, that we find stuff to buy that we maybe don't need. Do I really need this? And I find myself saying that out loud before I hit that buy it now button on eBay, or before I click that bid button, or before I contact somebody by private message, or make a bid on Deal or No Deal. Do I really want it? Do I really need it? And that's a good question. But he says, I'm beginning to search for new areas, and that's something I've done. I've broke out into new areas, whether it's comic books or getting into vintage collection, whatever your drug of choice is. Sometimes we need to branch out a little bit if we're hitting a wall with regard to vintage Kenner or vintage collection. And he says just to have something to look forward to hunting. And I'm kind of that way right now. I'm not necessarily only wed to vintage Kenner or TVC or even just Star Wars comics. I've branched out into other comic lines, other comic book heroes. And that's been fun for me because it allows me to collect other type of areas other than Star Wars without breaking the bank on my space constraints, which was another kind of topic within that video I made. He also says, I think that wanting is often better than the having, and I cannot agree with that more. And I know a number of you have felt that way. I got other comments like that from the first video, that the process of wanting and hunting for it is almost better than once you actually acquire it. And I can say that I'm 100% guilty of that, whatever it is. There are certain items in my collection that I'm extremely happy about having. The Toxic Bosk, for example, the Toxic Bosk, that's a very rare figure. You know, sometimes I forget I have it, and then I walk by it, and I'm like, wow, that is an awesome item. Or, you know, comic books are really easy to store in boxes and put away and not look at for a month or 2 or 3. And sometimes I'll pull out one of those storage boxes of my CGC graded comics, and I pull out one. I pulled out my first Grand Admiral Thrawn, which is Heir to the Empire #1. I pulled that out in a 9.8, and I saw that, and I was like, wow, that is an amazing book. That's an amazing investment, and I was really happy to have it. But there's certain things, like the wanting is often better than the having, and I think that's, for me, I'm guilty of that with the vintage collection. And I've really tried to kind of pare that back a little bit in terms of buying every single vintage collection. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Eric Larson says, I'm thinking of switching from the carded set to set them free for new stuff. And I think what he's implying there is that I'm going to go to loose figures, loose graded, whatever it is. There are a number of you that mention that you have a mint on card vintage Kenner collection, and with what prices are doing, with the risks of them degrading inside the blister, with the risk of the blister yellowing and no longer staying clear. The bubbles falling apart, the blister falling off the card. Some of you are worried about the risks of that, and so you're selling those at these peak prices. We looked at some of the mint on card sales prices in the last Hakes auction, and they were absolutely stupefying. Even for common stuff like Return of the Jedi's, admittedly with clear blisters, or with really high grade Empire Strikes Back stuff, AFA 85s going for 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times what I think the market values are. That's really tempting. If you are a mint on card collector, why not sell those and just collect loose graded? And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the loose graded on eBay selling for some, especially high grade, selling for some of the insane prices. AFA 85s, 85 pluses, 90s, just insane prices versus where they were even 6 months or a year ago. So I think that there's a lot of that. There's a lot of new collectors maybe that can't afford the mint on cards that are going for graded loose figures. So, and then there's people like Eric who are considering selling their mint on cards to maybe quote unquote downgrade to just loose or loose graded. There's nothing wrong with that. And, we all have a different migration. I think that for me, the migration was loose graded to mint on card. And now that mint on card are so expensive, do I really want or need any more mint on card? I don't have a huge mint on card collection relative to some collections that are out there. I have a nice one. I'm not saying it's not nice, but do I really need more when I'm already under space constraints? As you can see here, I'm already pretty full. So that was an interesting thought. Matt Shitty says, my way of combating fatigue with collecting is I'm technically still collecting, but rather than more figures, etc., I'll look at how I can display things better. That's a great way to stay connected. And this is kind of connected to my comment to you guys when I thanked you subscribers and my Patreon supporters. Me making videos allows me to stay plugged into the collecting community without buying anything. And for Matt, maybe it's How do I change the display? I know that Only One Kenobi, that's something he talks about in his videos a lot, is changing the displays up for his loose collection, or maybe moving things around for his carded walls. So that's a really great way to stay connected, I think, to collecting, and still feel like you're doing something. You're still progressing, so to speak, within collecting without spending money. So that's a really great comment, I think, from Matt. Rodney Webster, shout out to you, Rodney. He's a Patreon supporter. He says, I'm glad I'm not a completionist, that's for sure. I only collect items I like or items I consider to be a good deal. And I think I fall most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time I fall under this category. This is a great way. And I would say there's others out there that I know and I'm friends with that feel this way. That I had to stop very quickly. I learned early on with vintage collection, I cannot have them all. I tried to keep up for maybe a year or so, and then I'm like, you know what, this is a pointless exercise. And so I've actually sold off a lot of my graded vintage collection to either friends or on Rogue 5 Toys, because I realized that the thought or the ability to complete the vintage collection, it's just impossible. I started too late, and my space constraints are too much for me to stay to keep up with everything. And so that's a good point by Rodney. And now I only buy the vintage collection figures that I really want. And I'll freely admit, so last week, as you saw on Boss Bounty on Only One Kenobi's channel, they announced some original 96 figures, like the Bespin guards, both black and white. Another R2-D2 is coming out, I think the sensor scope. And one other figure, a Stormtrooper on a Star Wars card back. They all look amazing. Every one of those look amazing. But they're exclusives, and we're going to talk more about that, the fatigue we get from exclusives. So it's harder to get them in clean condition. But also, do I really want them? And the answer kind of is no. The answer is kind of a no. It's kind of a no. It's as beautiful as they look in the mock-up card art and things like that. I'm probably going to skip every one of those, to be honest with you. So, and we'll talk more about exclusives here in a little while. Chris Sorensen, this is a great comment that made me laugh out loud. There is a thin line between collecting and hoarding. That is absolutely true, and I think that a lot of you would agree with me. It's such a true statement. Adam Guggenheim had a similar comment. He said, great video, I hit the wall. Too many pre-orders. It takes it from collecting to hoarding. Too much is too much. It's not OCD, it's quote-unquote collecting. So Adam's another Patreon supporter. Thanks, Adam, for the comment. That's a great point, and I freely admit that there is some OCD qualities to my collecting. You can see it in this behind me. I'm very OCD with how I present stuff, and once I kind of can't display it and it goes into a closet, I start to panic a little bit when that closet fills up, because it means I don't need it, and I'm being a little bit of a hoarder. So that's when I start to pare things down, and I've pared down a lot over the last month or so. But those are great points. Matthew Martin says, yeah, I think everyone feels this one. The current pre-order 12 months in advance for everything is a real killjoy for collecting with my kids. They don't get the buzz of hunting in store and are slowly moving on to other things to be into. And I think that that's true for me too. My son was really into vintage collection and even vintage Kenner. But because we don't really find them in the stores here locally, it's hard for him to get excited about it. Clicking on a pre-order on Big Bad Toy Store or Entertainment Earth or wherever you order your figures from, it's just not the same excitement as finding them in the store. And I really did feel that excitement when I walked into that Target. You guys, I talked about it in a video a long time ago. I walked into a Target and they had a wall of the Target exclusive droid C-3POs. And I was just, it really brought back memories of my childhood when I went into Kmart's or Best, it wasn't Best Buy, it was like a Best, I think is what the name of it. And they had walls and walls of those vintage Kenner figures on the walls. And it was just, hunting through it. And my mom saying, you can pick one. And I'd have to decide which figure I wanted to get out of all of the figures that were on the walls. We don't get that anymore. We really don't get that anymore. So that's kind of sad. And, the pre-orders, I wanted to mention this. And we're going to talk a little, there's a few other comments related to pre-orders. We went from complaining about not enough vintage collection figures to now we're complaining about too much and how they make the pre-orders way too far in advance. Is there a middle ground there? I'd like to hear comments on that from you guys. Is there a middle ground on that? Or are we being an annoying collecting community by now complaining about the fact that there's too much to pre-order. Hasbro has gone from barely supporting the vintage collection to now that there's just so much to collect that I can't keep up with it. And so I think I really do think that part of the blame is on us. We hemmed and we hauled and we blamed Hasbro for not having enough, and now we have too much, and they're making all these pre-orders so early. So but part of it makes me wonder, is Hasbro trying to streamline their manufacturing process by getting a better and earlier look at how many pre-orders there are? Some of these figures that we're pre-ordering, they're not coming out until October, November, December of next year. But this early pre-order process, it gives Hasbro an early kind of forecast as to how many they need to produce. Are they trying to make their production more efficient with less kind of peg warmers, things like that? You looked at like the ESB Lando, for example, or Quill. You see them peg warming everywhere. And that's really all I see in stores. I'm sure that Lobot might, or some of those other figures might not be far behind. But I just wonder if there's a middle ground there, that going from too little to too much. Is there some middle ground there, or are we to blame? Let me know in the comments below. Rob Rosati says, I'm just getting tired of the pre-order cancellations. And the cancellations is a big thing. I had a number of my items get canceled by both Target as well as Walmart. And I also canceled my Walmart. I'm not buying from Walmart anymore. I straight up am not going to buy from Walmart anymore. If there's a Walmart exclusive that I want, I'm going to get it from Bounty Hunters Guild or from a trusted friend like Boss Bounty overseas, where they get those Walmart exclusives from Star Action Figures, and they arrive near mint plus. But I'm done ordering from Walmart for sure. Target's been hit or miss. But anyway, he says, I'm tired of the pre-order cancellations, lack of stock, eBay prices, and shipping costs. This is another important point that I didn't talk about in my video. The shipping costs have gone up so much because gas prices have gone up so much. Now when I ship stuff off to CGC or to Collector Archive or AFA, those shipping costs are a lot more. And I, again, I want to say thanks to my Patreon supporters, because your support when I make those giveaways, if it's a giveaway that's overseas, it's $50. It's $50 minimum to ship those items off now. But the shipping costs are definitely really, really expensive, whether in the U.S. or Canada or wherever. I'm getting worn out with that as well. Matthew Priest says, collecting fatigue is hitting me hard with TVC. The figures are amazing, but it's getting really difficult and pricey to try to keep up with Hasbro. And 100%, I can't keep up. He says, I find myself combating the fatigue by focusing on vintage Kenner pieces or working on completing the missing pieces out of the vintage playsets here and there. That's a great idea. If you got loose playsets where you're missing some parts and you can kind of shop for those parts individually on eBay or wherever else, that's a great way to combat fatigue, because the individual pieces on those vintage Kenner playsets, maybe they're not nearly as expensive as some of these other items. And he says, I only pre-order what I really, really like. He says, I canceled the Miggs Mayfield Target exclusive. I did the exact same thing. I was like, man, that Miggs Mayfield looks awesome. And I thought about it. And I was like, I don't need this. So I canceled it. So there are a number of figures that I did pre-order, though. I'm not going to lie. I've got a number of really awesome figures on pre-order, and I'm happy with the ones I pre-ordered. But the Miggs, I think I'm going to pass on for now. Wooden Jedi says, the best advice, as you say, is to take a break. Makes sense. Everything will be available anyway on the secondary market. You might have to pay more on the secondary market, but you can always catch up later or refocus your interest. So anyway, it's hard. It's very, very hard, as he says here, to have discipline as a collector. I'm getting more and more disciplined, and I'm only picking and choosing, and I'm sniping what I want instead of getting everything. And it's hard. Fortuna Bib, I have exclusives fatigue. That is absolutely true for me too. But in all fairness to Hasbro, as others have pointed out, these exclusives would not get made if it wasn't for Hasbro, if it wasn't for Walmart and Target claiming these exclusives and paying extra for these exclusives. The R&D that goes into it, the manufacturing and tooling that goes into a lot of these exclusives, they would not get made without Walmart and Target. So I recognize that. but half of them arrived damaged, and that's why I stopped ordering them. So I'm not supporting those Walmart exclusives. Amazon, I don't buy from Amazon anymore either. I get too many baggies. Target, I just got a couple of the Clone Wars animated figures that arrived to me in a baggie. They're kind of like an 80 condition. I'm going to give them both away on the channel. You know, I can't get anything from Target or Walmart. Target occasionally, but Walmart and Amazon, absolutely not. And nothing arrives to me in good shape. So it's really, really tough. Playing Wookie says, with me, it's just too much, and money is a factor. He's completely stopped collecting modern, and he only collects vintage Kenner now. I know a lot of folks like that, but I also know a lot of folks who've done the other way. That the vintage Kenner stuff, because it's gotten so expensive, as we see in my videos, they've had to stop. It's like, it's just gotten too expensive for me. I'm only going to collect vintage collection. So I don't think there's any wrong way to answer it. I don't think there's any wrong way. But the vintage Kenner stuff is definitely getting really, really pricey, and it really puts a crimp. If you collect both, it puts a crimp on things. Peter Reich, this is a really Reichelt. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Peter. This was probably the best comment that I found. As a collector of various things for over 30 years, I have one piece of advice: focus and collect the best. Instead of feeding an obsession and getting 10 items, just get one high quality item. I totally agree with that, especially as it relates to Kenner items. You know, if there's an opportunity to get 3 or 4 AFA 70 type quality items versus getting one AFA 85 or 80 grade items, I'd rather have the 80 or 85 all day long. All day long. Not only are those going to appreciate in value more, as we've seen in the videos, people pay multiples going from an 80 to an 85 or an 85 to a 90. You know, for mint on card figures, I very rarely can afford an 85, but I very rarely buy anything below an 80, just because I think long term those are going to hold their value more, and there's less of them in near mint plus condition rather than 70s and 75s where those items are pretty plentiful. You know, there's a lot of 70s and 75s out there, or less. Now, again, there's always an exception to every rule. My Toxic Boss, for example, is an AFA 60. That's about all I can afford because, you know, a near mint plus example is going to set you back about, you know, $4,000 or more, and I just couldn't afford to spend that kind of money. So, but this was great advice, and this is kind of what I've really taken to heart with my collecting. I think the only exception for that for me is the vintage collection. I probably, you know, have too many of them now. Instead of getting one high quality, you know, VC 101 original issue Shea Vizsla, I have, you know, a lot of the modern stuff, the more recent releases. So it's a hard thing to combat. Ian Cincini says, personally, I'm completely at the other end of the spectrum. I simply can't get enough of Star Wars vintage. The problem I have is space. And that's my constraint too. Space is an issue. I can't display my collection how I would like. So I never have that feeling of satisfaction. And that's kind of what I was getting at. I think he said it more succinctly than I did in my video. I don't get any satisfaction from collecting and then throwing it in a closet, or collecting and throwing it in a drawer or cabinet. If I can't display it, then why have it? That's kind of where I am. Now, that being said, I still have plenty of stuff in storage right now, but I've definitely pared back down when I can't display the item. So anyway, give me some more thoughts. We can continue on with this discussion if you guys want to share some more commentary on any of the stuff we talked about in this video. I just really appreciate the commentary from you guys. You guys said it better than I did, quite honestly. So let's share some more and let's keep the discussion going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.